Welcome to today's show. I'm visiting here today with Derek Lobo. Derek, welcome.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me here.
So, Derek, for the listeners, can you give us your background of how you got to where you are today and start with your educational experience and the entrepreneurial model that you built here?
Well, I guess the first thing is I'm an immigrant, right? So that kind of forms your mindset a little bit. I moved to Canada when I was 8 years old. And so I arrived 8 years old, you know what I mean, into Canada. So that formed you a little bit differently, let's say. But then I got educated here, and I came from kind of a lower middle class family. My father was an aircraft mechanic. We had 6 kids, right? A 1,200 square foot house, one bathroom. Everybody relates to that, right? But back in the day, nobody had 7 bathrooms the way people have now and things like that. Anyway, so I wasn't a great student. I was an okay student. I managed to get myself through college, and I studied something called metallurgy, which is the engineering of steel. And I worked for Canada's largest steelmaker. But what I realized very early on in my career was that, you weren't really going to make a ton of money having a job. But I noticed all my steelworker colleagues had lots of money. They made good steelworker wages. So I started syndicating limited partnerships and buying small rental properties. That's how I got started. I found myself working in this large company where my coworkers had money. I didn't. They were looking for a young guy to kind of go find some properties, do the work, to buy them, manage them, and renovate them and things like that. So that's how I kind of got into the business. But that got me into the apartment business, right? And I could have done anything, right? But I got into the apartment business, and I started recognizing that this was probably, Alan, if you think of it, probably one of the largest industries in North America, right? About 30% of North Americans rent, right? They spend about a third of their income in rent. So you do that, that's pretty much got to be, I think, the largest industry in North America, the rental business. And so once I arrived in that business, I just started looking for opportunities in the rental business and gaps in the marketplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Tell me about your first deal. When you said you got into the apartment business, what was the first deal you did?
Well, I guess the first deal I did was probably when I was about, 22, 23. I bought a house and I converted it into a triplex.
Okay.
All right. So that was the first. I still drive by that property. I drive my kids by it fondly. Right. I lived in the basement as a bachelor. I rented out the first floor and the second floor. And then when I got married, we moved into another unit. Then as I had kids, we kind of converted it back into a house again. But that was, I guess, in a sense, my first deal. Right. I borrowed the money from my brothers and sisters who were all younger than me, to buy the house. And that got sort of whet my appetite towards rental income and realizing just how powerful it could be from a cash flow standpoint, from a tax standpoint, and so on. So that's how I got in the business, let's say, right? Then after that, I started just syndicating limited partnerships while I was working full-time in the steel mill with my, wealthy steelworker colleagues. And so I got up to about 100 units in total that we bought. And then something interesting happened. The jurisdiction that I'm in Ontario, we have rent controls. Lots of people know about rent controls now with the current, pandemic situation and so on. But, there was no guide for apartment owners to take their building through this rent review process to raise their rents. So I decided to write a book on the topic. I mean, it could have been anything I wrote a book on. I just happened to be in the right place, right time. I wrote a book on the topic, and it was amazing that I just hit the market at the right time with this book. And I had sales of $100,000. This is when I was in my mid-20s, let's say, right, of this book, which I self-published. And it wasn't the self-publishing that was the revelation to me. It was the apartment industry and how it wasn't that sophisticated compared to other forms of real estate. Like in office real estate, if I'm renting to a large company, they expect a certain level of service because they're renting, offices in New York and Buenos Aires and Paris and in Toronto. But in the apartment business, it's very local. It's only as sophisticated as sort of the guy down the road. Does that make sense? So I found an industry that was huge, but not very sophisticated. So I thought to myself, that's the business I want to be in. I didn't want to go to Microsoft and try and turn it around, right? There were geniuses over there, but in the local real estate industry, you can make a difference by bringing best practices and things like that to it. So it was a combination of understanding the business at the grassroots level because I was an investor, and then understanding it as let's say an educator, because I wrote the book on this topic related to real estate. And then one day I started helping apartment owners lease up their building. So one thing led to another. Does that make sense? So I was an owner, I wrote a book. Then people said, well, you've written the book on the topic. Why don't you help me with what you wrote about? And then I'd go help them. And then finally one day someone said to me, why don't you just come and do it instead of talking about it and writing about it? And so that led to the progression of different services in real estate. And I wound up basically doing lease ups of distressed apartment buildings all over North America, all over the US. So I've worked in, the 10 Canadian provinces and 17 US states, going into distressed properties and turning them around. But then something interesting happened. I started getting calls from real estate brokers saying, will you come and lease up this building? So they became my sales and marketing people because they couldn't sell the building with vacancies. Make sense? So they were bringing me in to do the lease up. And then I started thinking, oh my gosh, I looked at how much money I was making and how much the broker was making. And I thought, well, he's making a lot more money than me. So then I went on a little bit of a quest to find the best in class real estate broker. And I started visiting different brokerage organizations in the US and looking at the brokerage model. And I came across a brokerage model that I liked a lot. And at that point, opened up a brokerage firm and became an apartment broker. And then as an apartment broker, I took that same track record of writing, teaching, speaking, and executing into brokerage. So now I write, speak, educate on the topic of commercial real estate in the apartment sector and brokerage. But the majority of my income comes from actual brokerage. You have about 20 staff, and the thing I synthesized from looking at all the different brokerage firms is that the business, everything is more complex now, Alan, right? Nothing is the way it used to be 10 or 20 years ago. So the lone broker working just doesn't work. You need a team of people. I need database people. I need technology people, marketing people, right? Admin people, sales people. But working as a team is so much better than the old real estate model of the lone wolf going out there and finding the deal. You know what I mean? And doing all the parts of it. So we take a team approach to brokerage.
So Derek, when you're evaluating your model, you have the brokerage model, you have a property management model.
Yep.
What is, and there's a lot of people that do this. Are you representing a certain group of investors? Do you take anybody's money to say, hey, Derek, we like to come in and be part of what you do?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I think that's a key thing to do here is to focus, right? So my client is, and let's stay on the brokerage side because that's the majority of our revenue and that's the real opportunity. My specialty is selling apartments from first, second, and third generation original developers to institutions. That's my business. Okay. And so that the first generation, sometimes the developer, the actual guy who builds it. Okay. And that's where the consulting comes in. But the other part of the business is for second and third generation people whose parents have built large empires. Now they've taken it over. Right. But then all of a sudden there start being 3 or 4 brothers and sisters. Then there's 14 third generation people. Right. So oftentimes, people have different visions of which way they're going. They've got to sell the portfolio or they've got to sell parts of the portfolio to cash people in, cash people out. So I would say my client is the seller. The buyer is an institution, nice people, but they're kind of nameless, faceless because they change. An institution, a certain pension fund, one I've been dealing with for 20 years has had 8 different people in the acquisition manager's position, but that family is always the same, right? So that's who I focus in on, is understanding the family dynamics of real estate ownership. And that's different, Alan, than the institutional owner dynamics of owning real estate. Make sense?
You got a tough market, especially when you get down to that second and third generation.
Well, you know something about the family office.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. But and you've got to treat everybody with, respect, right? But people have gone in different directions. Some become doctors, some become lawyers, some have become film producers. Some are still stuck in the day-to-day property management grind, right? So it's probably more psychology and sociology than it is real estate.
So Derek, you're in Toronto, based out of
Yes.
Toronto? Okay, so
Yes.
But you do across the border transactions in other countries, or?
The apartment business, for whatever reason, has stayed rather provincial in Canada.
Okay.
In the US, people go across state lines just way quicker than they do here. I think it has to do with the size of the geography, and it's only, 35, 36 million people over a much larger area than the continental United States. So I focus mainly on the Ontario market, which is a market, it was about, 12 million people, something like that. But there's enough business in here for sure for several apartment brokers, and certainly for a boutique brokerage firm like ours. Yeah.
How big are you right now? And how big do you want to be?
I'm in this program that you know all about called the Strategic Coach. And so I'd always set the goal of making $1 million on one check. Okay. Because that exercise, the biggest check, right? Or the largest check. So I remember being in the class and I wrote down, I want to get one check of $1 million. And I visualized it. I could never get that consulting. It's impossible. That's when I realized I got to be in another business to get $1 million check. That's how I thought. Well, one way to do is to leverage the consulting in the brokerage. So when I got that $1 million check, I'd left the Strategic Coach, but I photocopied it and I mailed it to Dan saying, hey, by the way, thanks for the largest check exercise. And he wrote me back and he was just starting the 10 times program. And so it was perfect timing. I just got this check in. I'd given him the credit for giving me the idea to do it. He says, hey, I came up with the 10 times program. So I signed up for the 10 times program and that's how I met you. Right. So I think my goal then was, and it seemed impossible at the time, is to take that up to 10 million. Fair enough? The one check. I've had a few more checks. I've gotten more than halfway there. Right. So how big do I want to be? It's a good question. I think as long as I'm engaged and fascinated in what I do, right, then those larger checks become, mental constructs, just things I want to go for in the future. Whether I hit that $10 million check, let's see, right? But I kind of suspect I will, because it's sort of like a memory hook in your mind. You kind of place that thought, okay, I want to get that, and then it's there. So you're looking for those opportunities. Does that make sense?
How has the pandemic affected you in your business?
Well, yeah. So I've been standing where I've been standing here for 9 months. I come in the office every day. Not a lot of people are here, but I have, number one, I think it's taught me, I always believed I had to be in front of people. I would drive, I had a driver, blah, blah, blah. You can, once you have a relationship with someone, I think you can have meetings 70, 80% as effective on Zoom. And now I can have 6, 8 a day, right? Whereas I could only do 2 or 3 a day and I'd be exhausted at the end of the day after going here, going there, all over the city and all over the province. So I think number one, it's taught me a lot about communications. It's, and the other thing it's taught me about is, and I think for the people I'm talking to who are usually the beneficial apartment owner, is about transparency. Because, when things are tough, people are always more honest. People are always more open. And I find that my hotel clients who own hotels are completely transparent because it was so bad for them that there's nowhere to go. But you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think I found the Zoom and the Riverside FM and these medias very valuable. I found being prepared for the conversations and adding value, asking good questions valuable. And you can find and execute business without meeting people. I guess be the biggest lesson that I've learned personally. Yeah, I always thought I had to be there. I had to be in front of them. You know what I mean? I realized that with the technology change, as well as the cultural change, the clients accepting, you doing a Zoom meeting, it's been pretty powerful. Yeah, we had our second best year ever in 2020.
Interesting.
Being locked down for 9 months of it.
There's a lot of tenants, I'm sure, that are struggling with employment. Yes. And so how has that overall affected your business? You got rent control going on and,
Yeah. So it certainly put pressure on my client, who's the apartment owner and the property manager. But one of the first things I did when COVID hit was I started doing webinars on strategies during the shutdown. We didn't even know what to call it at that point, right? COVID, the pandemic. But right when it started, we started doing webinars advising owners how to approach it, right? And so that was interesting because that wound up creating a bit of a following. And we had, I think, probably 5,000 unique visitors come to, the webinars that we were doing every couple of weeks. Just no charge, just advising apartment owners on what to do. And one of the pieces of advice that I gave them, I said, this is an extraordinary opportunity to build a relationship with your tenants. Because landlords never call tenants and say, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Do you need any help? Right? This was an opportunity, really a historic opportunity to do that, where the tenants knew you weren't calling, like either they were paying the rent or they weren't. You know what I mean? They either had the money or they didn't. And most people who had the money did pay it. I'll say that 100%, right? There was really people thought, oh, well, tenants would game the landlord or the system. We really didn't see that. Now, that might be different in other parts of the country, but in the Canadian marketplace, that wasn't the case. So I said to apartment owners, look, this is a wonderful opportunity to take that not historically tense relationship between landlord and tenant and improve on it. And many people did that. Many people did that. And if they didn't do it in 2020, 2021's a do-over. You get another chance.
Are you optimistic for this next year?
I think that there are, in everything there's polarity. In politics, in business, in religion, in government, everything is becoming polar, right? So I see a group of people who are saying it's going to be the roaring 20s, right? And then there's some people saying zombie Armageddon, right? I don't know. I mean, our head is in a fog, right now. And it's like flying in an airplane in a cloud. At some point, it's going to drop below the cloud. And it's going to be clear. I'm not sure whether we're going to see Ireland, the beautiful green grass. I'm not sure whether we're going to see the desert with the Grand Canyon cracked open, right? Or I'm not sure whether they're just going to drop down and see the Pacific Ocean with no end in sight. I think that they're going to be winners and losers, right? That people are going to adapt. And I think that entrepreneurs have adapted better because they're used to change. They're used to stuff going wrong, right? I think it's been harder for younger people. It's been harder for working moms at home, right, to work. So it's really very, the outcome I think is going to be, Alan, I think the outcome is going to be mixed. There's going to be the people who will do well and those who won't.
What is your ideal client?
He's usually driving a pickup truck. Right. It's mostly self-made. Never knew it was going to be this big.
Well, let me ask it another way.
Yeah.
Do you want a person selling a $80,000 condo, or do you want someone in a larger transaction? In other words, where's your sweet spot?
Yeah. No. My average deal size right now is probably around 60 or 70 million. Yeah. So we're selling. So these pictures behind me here, like we're selling apartment buildings like this or portfolios like this.
Okay.
Yeah. So my average apartment guy is if it's the newer stuff, it's a first generation developer, right? Built it, took the risk of building it, stabilized and sold it. Or then there's the other side of it where it's the second or third generation of that same guy. And now the time has come that they have to go different ways. Fair enough? They've kind of been getting along, but things are changing. Technology is changing. The demands are changing. The capital stack is changing, right? And things like that. So it's generally, I have, Alan, decided to do larger deals. We don't do smaller deals. Yeah, we don't do houses or duplexes or anything like that. Yeah, generally larger apartment buildings. Yeah.
Derek, how does a person reach out to you for more information?
Well, you can just go on YouTube and put my name in, Derek Lobo. I put a ton of videos on there, but just derek.lobo@svn.com is a good way to reach me.
Okay. All right. So, Derek, we appreciate you being with us today. And any insight for 2021, how people should face the future here?
I think you've got to stay flexible, right? Your mind has to be looking around all the time. Even just driving home some days, I take a different route home. Just you don't know what's coming. stay flexible, stay open, be brave. Don't be afraid of asking other people what you should do. Right? And I think for my children, I just say, this is an extraordinary time. Don't miss this.
All right, great advice. Great advice. So Derek, thanks for being with us today.